All right, we are going to feed some white worm cultures. What are we going to feed them? This was plain Greek yogurt. It has the living, somewhere it should say something about living active cultures. So there's live bacteria in here. What else do I put in there? Oatmeal. Also, those little specks are a quality pellet fish food. So oatmeal, fish food, yogurt. How much of each? It doesn't really matter. You don't need as much fish food as the other ingredients. It just doesn't really matter. Depends how many worms you're feeding, how much you need overall, but there's no real measurement. I haven't messed with these bins for a few days. So there's a little screen in here, and this is where I would dip this in water to get the worms off, but because I waited too long, they ate all the food and then they went back down to the soil. So you have to put this on top of the food. I'll just show you. Clump of food, put this little screen on there, and then the worms will come up and consume that, crawl on the screen. But if you wait too long after the food's gone, then they're not on the screen anymore. Similar thing, the food's about gone. The worms are still there because that's where the food was, but there's really no worms on here. If it's a new culture, they don't need much food. Let's see if I got any that... Oh, here's a good example. So here's that little screen covered with worms. So they had not finished that food. So here's where we take the water bowl, put it in the water, and they just come right off. There you go. Now the screen holds a lot of water in those holes, so you want to get that water out because these cultures are bad about collecting lots of water anyways over time. Alright, we're going to put a little food in. We're going to move the food over here. You want to kind of move the worms around. Let's see what we got in here. Same thing. Great, look at all those worms. I mean, there's hundreds of worms there. And of all sizes. So I was surprised. Put it in there, they just come right off. They sink in the water very quickly. So you can even just lay it in there, stack them up in there. Tap the water off. Put more food in the worm culture. Press this down. You're not smashing it hard, but you want it to make good surface contact. If the food is down in like a hole and this is way above, it won't get very many worms on it. I don't know if you can see that. So the actual screen has to come in contact with the food for the worms to cover the screen. These are things you learn by doing it because you'll run into it over and over again. Do a couple more and then we'll call it done. This one's pretty good. The food's almost all gone, but there's still some worms on here. Worth putting it in here. You can see the amount of worms in there. It's just crazy. See all those worms? So in the fish room, I've got maybe 10 of these bins. In the back, I've got a cooler where I've got probably close to 20 cultures, which really... that's where we do most of our worm production. But they're all in these bins. These bins are pretty easy to work with. The bin itself has a big, I cut a square hole just because it's easy to cut with a razor blade. Then this is that polyfill. You can get it at I think Walmart or any kind of big box store. It's just that stuffed animal filling. I think it's polyester, but you want to make sure it doesn't have any mold inhibitors or additives in it. It's just pure polyfill. But here's the container. So this one wasn't as good because again, it's best to feed every 2 to 4 days. If you let them go too much longer, you just don't get much of a harvest because it's hard. There's tons of worms in here. Tons of worms. But they get down in the dirt and it's hard to get them out. Well, again, put the food down, lay the screen on top, tap it a little bit to make sure it's getting good contact with the food, and then harvest. Now tomorrow there'll be worms on it. The next day, usually 2 days later, is when it really is usually covered. But if you wait a couple more days after that, then they've eaten all the food and they go back down in the dirt. Does that make sense? So that's 4. That's all I'm going to do for this video. You get the idea. Let's strain it though. I'll show you how I strain them. So now we're going to strain the worms. So there's a lot of dirt and muck in there. I just don't want to dump that right into the aquarium. This is a little fine kind of brine shrimp net I got off the internet. Pour it in. You want it to be a pretty fine net because there's lots of little tiny baby worms. Now I go ahead and just use straight up tap water. I'm not concerned about it. So I'm rinsing them. If there's some dirt clods or there's a little piece of stick, I'll just get that out. But if there's a little dirt clod or little food particles, that can go in your tank. It's not a big deal. Rinse it, let it strain. Here's a bowl of, now this is dechlorinated water because this is going to go into the aquarium. Flip it. You want to touch down in the water. They all go in the water. Now there'd be some stuck in the net. I usually just set this right in an aquarium or a barrel or something with fish just in there, and they clean that off. But here's all the worms. So you can see there's a ton of them. Now from here you could use a turkey baster, or I've got some very large syringes. Here's a small syringe, a little medicine dropper. So this works great because look, see, you can suck them up. Let's go feed some fish. Alright, so we have our syringe of white worms. Let's just see if the fish like white worms. Oh, of course they love them. These are some mixed guppies and some gorgeous swordtails. There's a few of them in there with those black spots. I just love that. Give them some more. So white worms are highly nutritious. This is an excellent live food for your fish. It's great for prepping females for bringing on eggs or the whole breeding process. Great for guppies, platies, swordtails, any kind of fish. Awesome for tetras. A lot of little corydoras or little bottom dwellers will eat them up. Even plecos will eat on them. Neocaridina shrimp, or I would assume any shrimp, but I've got the kind of wild type cherry shrimp, and they love white worms as well. So you can't see in the camera, but actually all that little fine, looks like particles in the water, those are tiny baby worms. So this would be awesome to feed just like a community of breeding fish, because if you've got lots of plants and babies mixed in with those plants, and you feed the white worms to the whole tank, the big fish will eat the big worms, and all those little tiny babies floating around, those are going to be eaten by the little tiny fry. So it's excellent fry food. One more time. We'll give them just a little bit more. So they will live in the aquarium for I've always heard, now they get eaten up so fast, but I've heard a few days. So they're not going to immediately be rotting and contributing toward negative water quality. That's one benefit of the live food. Gorgeous fish. So that was just kind of a quick little intro to white worms. I'm going to be putting out some videos about culturing them and how to really keep them long-term successfully. But if you go to phillipsfishworks.com, you can buy a starter culture. It comes in a 12-ounce container like this, and it's going to be basically a section of one of those mature cultures. So it's going to have adult worms, baby worms, and more importantly, that dirt has had the worms in there a while, and they're going to be cocoons and different things, the cocoons which have the worm eggs in them. So that'll be in your culture. So what you can do is take that little 12-ounce cup and make your own bigger culture, starting it with this starter culture, and then give it a few weeks. Feed it every few days. Feeding it's very easy, very inexpensive, and this can give you a long-term, sustainable, inexpensive live food source that's highly nutritious. phillipsfishworks.com, get your starter culture. If you do it right, you only need to buy one, and you can have white worms the rest of your life.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day.